outstanding to have our own Justin Smith live here virtually to talk about the Crimson Tide, this 2022 class. So, Justin, over the weekend, the big news for Alabama football on the recruiting trail, five-star running back Emmanuel Henderson, given his verbal commitment to the Crimson Tide. He is the fifth verbal commitment for the Tide in the 2022 class, and the second five-star, joining one Ty Simpson at quarterback from the state of Tennessee. How big was this landing Henderson? What does he bring to the table? What is his skill set? What are his strong suits? Talk to me, Justin, about Henderson, and what does he bring to the Alabama running back room as a verbal commitment right now?
This is a great pickup for Alabama because they get another in-state prospect, one of the best running backs to come out of the state in quite some time, and they are getting a very versatile athlete. I think that is his biggest strength at the moment, is his versatility. A guy that can be used in a lot of different ways within Alabama's offense. He sort of reminds me of a TJ Yeldon if you had to compare him to a former Alabama running back. But in terms of his fit inside of an Alabama offense, I think he can have a similar fit to the fit that Kenyon Drake had when he was in Tuscaloosa. Because when Kenyon Drake was with Lane Kiffin on the Tide's offensive staff, he was used in so many different ways within Alabama's offense. We saw Kenyon Drake line up at the wide receiver position a couple of times. I think in the future we could see Emmanuel Henderson used all over Alabama's offense, and I think that is a strength of his, and I think it is a product of him being from a small school, being from Geneva County, where it is a 2A high school, which means you have to play multiple positions, as some may see that as a slight against him. I think he has turned that into a positive, and I think he's a very versatile athlete in the 2022 recruiting class. A huge get for the Tide. Several schools decided to offer him in basketball, give him an opportunity to be a dual sport athlete, hoping that would sway him to give them a verbal commitment. But it looks as if the Crimson Tide were too far ahead for them to snag that commitment late. And I think that makes this commitment that much bigger with those schools like Georgia and Auburn offering Henderson the opportunity to be a dual sport athlete, and him still choosing to stick and commit with the Crimson Tide.
Now, Justin, you and I spoke briefly before even coming on the show that Charles Kelly, Alabama's safeties coach, was the primary recruiter in Henderson's recruitment here. And Coach Kelly, a native of Alabama from Ozark, Alabama, he coached quite a few high schools in the state before becoming a college football coach here. So how much time or how much invested was Kelly in the recruitment or in getting Henderson's verbal commitment? What's the relationship like between Kelly and Henderson right now? And what made Henderson feel comfortable with Kelly as the primary recruiter?
I think their relationship is great. I think Charles Kelly was the lead recruiter for the Crimson Tide when, in terms of recruiting Henderson. When I got an opportunity to talk with him earlier in his junior season, he brought up Charles Kelly without me even talking about him. I just asked him about just his relationship with the Tide's coaching staff, and he immediately brought up Charles Kelly, talked about how he loves Coach Kelly, talked about how good of a man he was, just talked about their relationships and how real he was with him on the recruiting trail. So I definitely think he played a huge role in the Crimson Tide landing Henderson. He does recruit the state of Alabama pretty well for the Tide. He continues to do that, and I think his ability to build relationship is huge for the Crimson Tide on the recruiting trail, especially if they want to keep some of the top players inside the state. So he definitely was pivotal to the Tide, picking up a verbal commitment from Emmanuel Henderson.
If you're just tuning into the show, ladies and gentlemen, on a Monday, we're joined here virtually by Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine, talking about one five-star running back, Emmanuel Henderson, the latest commitment to Alabama's 2022 signing class. Now, Justin, as much as Charles Kelly was the primary recruiter, how much involved was Robert Gillespie when you talk Henderson? Because this is the Tide's new running backs coach. When Gillespie was hired, this was a home run move, a home run hire, and it still is a home run hire, seeing how Gillespie played his college ball at Florida in the SEC as a running back under Steve Spurrier. Wherever he's been at in the coaching ranks, Gillespie's had big-time success. Alabama has him right now on Coach Saban's staff. How much involved was Gillespie in the verbal commitment or getting the verbal commitment of Henderson?
Yeah, he was quite involved. Something about Gillespie, I think that Tide fans would like to hear. I think he is is having a huge impact on the Tide's recruiting efforts during his short time in Tuscaloosa. So many recruits who I talked to just over the weekend. I talked to four-star running back in the 2022 recruiting class, Amari Austin, and he just talked about his close relationship with Coach Gillespie. Just talked about how good of a recruiter he is. Just talked about how good of a coach he is, and I talked to another 2023 recruit who the Crimson Tide just offered recently, a 2023 running back in Justice Haynes out of Georgia. He pretty much said the same thing. He even talked about a time where him and his teammate, a teammate who eventually signed with North Carolina and Gillespie during the 2021 recruiting class. He just remembered a time where Gillespie walked on the field and just talked them through a couple of drills, and they could kind of get a feel of what his coaching style is like. So he is a very involved coach on the recruiting trail. I think he's going to be huge for Alabama in the future. He was definitely huge in the Tide getting Emmanuel Henderson as well, because the Tide wants to continue recruiting high ranked running backs, and Charles Huff was doing that at a high level. When you are a running back, you know that it's going to be a coach in the future. Gillespie had to come in and sell those guys on his coaching style, sell those guys with his recruiting tactics. So I definitely think he did a good job. And when it comes to Emmanuel Henderson being verbally committed to the Tide, something else Amari Austin told me over the weekend was that Gillespie is looking for a second running back. His exact words were, Alabama's looking for another stud now that they have Emmanuel Henderson verbally committed. So the Tide is not done recruiting running backs in this 2022 recruiting class, and Gillespie would definitely be a huge factor in them landing another possibly great running back in this 2022 recruiting class.
So, Justin, who's next now? So you bring in a Emmanuel Henderson as the fifth verbal commitment for the 2022 signing class. Who's next that Alabama is targeting? I know you were at a couple of camps, a couple of 7-on-7 things over the weekend. You got a chance to see a lot of these young targets, a lot of these young athletes out there on the field, doing their thing. But for Nick Saban and this coaching staff, who is next on the radar, or who are a couple of players next on the radar that we need to keep our eyes on in terms of who is Alabama targeting next for the 2022 class, potentially?
Well, the door is wide open. There's not one single recruit who has a commitment set or anything, but I can talk about a couple of guys who I feel the Crimson Tide are making moves for, and one of those prospects is a four-star defensive back in Traquan Fegans out of Oxford High School in Oxford, Alabama. He recently had a great talk with Coach Saban. His dad told me that Alabama is now rising in his recruitment. So Traquan Fegans out of Oxford High School is a prospect to watch out for. Georgia is a huge player in his recruitment, but it looks as if Alabama is trying to pick up their push for the in-state recruit. A prospect who I talked to over the weekend at that 7-on-7 camp in Atlanta was Jacoby Matthews, a five-star defensive back in the 2022 recruiting class. He has a top 6, and he has Alabama included in that top 6. He talked to me about his relationship with Pete Golding, has said that Alabama's coaching staff has consistently pushed for him ever since they offered him. So Jacoby Matthews is another prospect I would discuss here. And I will also bring in Baron Brown, another wide receiver who I've talked about in the past out of Tennessee, a 4-star wide receiver who Nick Saban compares to Devontae Smith. So there's a long list of prospects you can talk about at the moment in terms of guys who the Crimson Tide are rising with, but no one really has a commitment they set at the moment.
He's Justin Smith, ladies and gentlemen, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama Magazine, the boots on the ground, the legend himself out there evaluating, breaking down, looking at the film of all of these student athletes as they are making their rounds on the recruiting trail. But today, joining us here virtually, talking about 5-star running back Emmanuel Henderson, giving his verbal commitment to the Crimson Tide as of over the weekend. Justin, appreciate you coming on the show. Take care of yourself. Stay safe, man. Be good out there.
You do the same, Steven.
Thank you for watching Touchdown Alabama Magazine's YouTube channel. To continue to get the best in Alabama football content, subscribe here and turn on your notifications to stay connected with the hottest shows covering your Crimson Tide.